Let me introduce myself. I am George Mendoza. I am a senior engineer at Nebulab. And for the past couple of months, I've been focused on developing and improving Solidus Starter Frontend. For this presentation, I will demo Solidus Starter Frontend, how to install it, how it looks like, and what changes it makes to a fresh Solidus application. I will also discuss how and why it differs from the current Solidus Frontend gem. And finally, I will cover the repercussions of changing the implementation of Solidus Frontend from a gem to a Rails application template. What is Solidus Starter Frontend? Solidus Starter Frontend is the new and updated front-end solution for Solidus. It aims to replace the current Solidus front-end gem. What were the initial goals in developing Solidus Starter Frontend? So this text you can find from the Solidus Starter Frontend repo. The project aims to deliver a modern, minimal, semantic, and easy to extend code base for a more efficient bootstrapping experience. As you can see from the bullet points, the code base covers HTML, the style sheets, and the JavaScript. But aside from this, it also covers the controllers and views of the front end. The keyword that stands out for me in this initial goals is the word modern. As you know, if you've seen the Solidus front-end gem, you can see that the current look and feel of the front end is a little bit dated. So with this front end, we've updated the appearance to be a bit more up to date. But aside from that, we also want to apply best practices to the code base itself and make it more modern. Okay. So let's go ahead and try to install Solidus Starter Frontend on a new Rails application. Oops, sorry. What we'll do is we will follow the instructions from the Solidus Starter Frontend README here. All right. There. First, we'll need a new Rails store. Okay, so we now have a store. Next, we are going to install Solidus. However, we do not want to add Solidus like this because this will install the old Solidus front-end gem. And that will conflict with the Solidus Starter front-end. So instead, we are going to add the individual components of Solidus, these four here, making sure that we do not include the Solidus front-end gem. Okay, so far so good. We can now install Solidus like this. Okay, this will take a while, so I'm going to pause the video for now until the installation completes. Okay, so the installation has completed successfully. Let's look at how the Solidus application looks like right now. Okay, as you can see, we are only seeing the default Rails homepage. We didn't add the Solidus front-end gem earlier, and that's why there's no front end yet. Okay, now we're ready to install Solidus Starter Frontend. However, before we do that, let's just commit these changes first so that we can use meld later on to compare the Rails application after we've added Solidus Starter Frontend. All right. Okay. Let's go back to our Solidus Starter Frontend README. To install Solidus Starter Frontend, we just need to copy the starter frontend files to our project like this. So we are calling the Rails app template task with the argument of the URL of the template that we want. Okay, so it has finished installing. Let's see how the server looks like right now. Okay. This is the new Solidus Starter Frontend. Let's try checking out the product. Let's go to a product category. You can see that we can filter by categories and by price range. Let's try this one. Okay. Let's choose a product. Okay, let's just refresh the page. Sometimes SQLite does this. We can choose the variant of our product. We can update its quantity. Let's try checking out that item in our cart. Okay, here's the checkout. Let's fill in the billing address and set the country to United States. Use the same billing address. Okay. Choose a shipping method. Choose a payment type. And place the order. Okay, so we have successfully we have successfully checked out an item. From my account, we should be able to see the orders that we made. So that is a quick demo of the new front end. We have seen how it looks like, on the site. This time, let's see how the files have changed. Okay. Under the application directory, you can see that the template added some new JavaScript code as well as some style sheets. You can find most of the style sheets you can find under the components directory. We have a custom components directory wherein we add our view components. View components are Ruby objects that are used to build markup. So here's an example of a view component. We are using the view component gem from GitHub to implement these components. Think of components as presenters on steroids. The template added new controllers for our front end, such as our checkout controller, our products controller, as well as our user controllers. It also added a mailer for confirmation and for resetting passwords. So those controllers and mailers have corresponding views, which you can find here. Okay. So that covers the application directory. Under config, I'd like to highlight the changes to the routes. So you can find the new front-end routes. They were added to the routes file of the application. And you can see that these front-end routes have higher precedence over the default routes provided by the Solidus engine. Under lib, we have some utility classes for configuration. And finally, under specs, you can find our spec tests for both unit and integration tests. So we use these tests ourselves in our CI to ensure that the front end is passing the build. So that's it. That covers we have just covered the Solidus Starter Frontend. We have seen what it looks like, and we have seen the changes that it applied to our Rails application. Oops, sorry. Let me Now that you have seen Solidus Starter Frontend, you might be curious to learn how it has changed from the current Solidus Frontend gem. As you know, the current Solidus Frontend is implemented as a gem, and it is bundled with Solidus. As such, when you install Solidus, Solidus Frontend becomes a dependency of your application. Ideally, that means that if we update Solidus Frontend, you can just update the version number of the gem in your gem file, and it would be updated seamlessly. However, as we'll see later, for most stores, that's not the case. Okay. In contrast, Solidus Starter Frontend is implemented as a Rails application template. It has, unlike Solidus Frontend, it's not bundled with Solidus. So you have to install it separately. It's also not a dependency of your application. Instead, the copy that the code that the template provides is copied to your Rails application. As such, the use case for Solidus Starter Frontend is usually on fresh Solidus applications. It doesn't make much sense to install it on an existing Solidus app. So why did we make the change, or why did we change the front-end implementation from a gem to a Rails application template? Let's consider first, what are the downsides of keeping Solidus Frontend as a gem, which it is currently now? First, for beginners, there is a steep learning curve in overriding the presentation code. So this learning curve, this only becomes easier once you become more familiar with Rails engines. Second, even though Solidus Frontend is implemented as a gem, when we update the gem, store apps most of the time don't get to benefit from those updates. We'll explore this second point in a bit more detail. In our discussions on improving Solidus Starter Frontend, we came to the realization that majority of stores heavily customize their frontend. Not just the appearance, but also the business logic and the functionality of the stores. As such, if a store has to customize the front end, it would have to override the presentation code of Solidus Frontend. This presentation code not only covers the Ruby code, such as the views and controllers, but also the static assets, style sheets, and the JavaScript code. It even covers binary files, such as our images. Now, the presentation code of Solidus Frontend is generally treated as public API. We don't have the syntactic means to separate public presentation code from private presentation code. And even if we did something like that by applying some conventions, I think it can be difficult to maintain. Thus, any changes to the GEM's presentation code effectively becomes major breaking changes, even if those changes are minor changes or minor tweaks. That's because if we make changes to the Solidus front-end presentation code, we don't know how it could affect applications that depend on the gem. Thus, if an application has customized the front end, which most likely it has, then it would be difficult for the app to keep those customizations compatible with updates to the Solidus front-end gem. In other words, if we update Solidus front-end, it would be difficult for the app to switch, to update its version number, and make the update seamless. On their part and on our part, it's difficult to identify what changes have made and how it could break the application. As such, to reiterate the second point I made earlier about the downsides of keeping Solidus front-end as a gem, we know that store applications don't get the benefit from gem updates. So there's the question of, do we really need to keep Solidus front-end as a gem? Because of that, we've taken actions. We've taken the following actions in our steps to improve Solidus Starter Frontend. We extracted the front-end component out of Solidus. We essentially decoupled the front end from the main Solidus gem. And we converted Solidus front-end from a gem to a Rails application template. How does this change from a gem to a template benefit both you, the clients of Solidus, and us, the maintainers of Solidus? For users of Solidus, now that it's implemented as a template, and now that when you install it, its code is just copied to your application, then the front end is much easier to customize now. You have direct access to the presentational code. This is especially advantageous for new users of Solidus and new Rails users. Second, on our part, since Solidus front-end is decoupled from Solidus, the Solidus front-end version no longer affects the Solidus version. What I mean is that if we update Solidus front-end, we no longer have to be concerned about it impacting the version of Solidus itself. At this point, if you look at the Solidus front-end gem, it doesn't have we haven't implemented a versioning scheme for it yet, because it's good enough to rely on the commit history to know the changes to Solidus Frontend. Considering that Solidus Starter Frontend is a Rails application template, what versions of Solidus does it support? In our implementation of Solidus Starter Frontend, we decided to keep it simple and just support the latest version of Solidus. The reasoning behind this is that usually, if you're creating a new Solidus application, you would want to install the most recent version of Solidus and its front end. So there's not much cases where you might want to install an older version of the front end, or you might want to install an older version of Solidus. Another question that might pop up is how does, considering that Solidus Starter Frontend is a Rails application template, how does this affect security updates? So at this point, if we find any security vulnerabilities in the front end, there's no automatic way we can publish that change to all existing Solidus applications because of the reasons I made explained earlier about we cannot determine what customizations have been made to Solidus apps and their front ends. As a result, you would have to manually update your applications if there are new vulnerabilities discovered. Because of this, we would highly recommend that you subscribe to the Solidus security mailing list. That way, you'll be informed if we discover any new vulnerabilities affecting not only the front end, but also the entire Solidus platform. Okay. If you're interested to learn more about Solidus Starter Frontend, we recommend that you check out the repo at GitHub. And you can also join the Solidus Slack channel. Okay. Thank you very much and have a good day.